All right, today we've got George Durham, who's new at Cicero. Really excited to chat with him. Had a chance to informally meet and learn about his background, and really excited about our discussion today and helping to inform folks about what you bring and your expertise and insight. So, George, let's start with your title and your background and what you do here at Cicero.
Sure. George Durham. I'm a new partner with Cicero, just joined the team very recently. I come from a varied background. Professionally, have done a range of things. I've worked for very small startup companies. I've worked for very large technology companies. I've always had a strong technology bent. And academically, I've come from a background in policy, public policy, kind of the intersection between public and private sector opportunities. And most of the companies I worked for, especially the last 15 plus years, I have been very much involved with corporate philanthropy, corporate social responsibility, and consulting. So advising organizations, companies, and some of their strategic work around philanthropy, social impact, engagement, etc. So I will be part of the social impact practice here at Cicero, working very closely with Jacob Allen and others, and really look forward to expanding and increasing the work Cicero does in this sphere.
Well, that's great. And today, specifically along those lines, we'll talk a little bit about corporate social responsibility, CSR. Organizations of all size and stripe are really considering seriously how to incorporate CSR into their overall mission, right? So let's just start there. Let's introduce what CSR is and maybe a little bit specifically things that should be considered within CSR. But let's start with an overview of CSR as you've worked on it.
I think, and I appreciate that you use the word incorporate, because I think if an organization, if a company is thinking about CSR as just sort of this box ticking exercise, they're not actually approaching it correctly. It really should be integral to their work and to the way they operate and function and invest as a company as they think about things. I think corporate social responsibility writ large is really about a company's work to ethically, responsibly, hopefully profitably contribute to and benefit the communities it serves, the communities of which it's part. Any company has a lot of different stakeholders, of course, including its owners, its shareholders, its employees, its customers, the people who live and work around its operations and things. And corporate social responsibility, all up, should reflect the company's efforts to be a good and responsible entity in delivering its products and services.
So, as an organization starts to look at incorporating CSR, at what point do these same companies start to look at bringing in outside expertise to help them incorporate CSR? Like, what role do we play as advisors and as your expertise to successfully incorporate to these organizations?
Well, of course, there's no one answer. It really depends on the company, of course. In my experience, in general, many of, a large, well-resourced, especially publicly traded company typically has some good thinking or infrastructure in place around its corporate social responsibility work.
Yeah.
And a lot of that is just driven by good governance, ESG needs and desires to be responsible there as a corporate entity. And so they will have many of those resources in-house. I think mid-size and smaller companies often do need some additional outside support to think through either the implementation of some of their corporate social responsibility initiatives or developing that strategy and that approach, and perhaps sometimes even in implementing that and making it happen. That's not to say that large companies don't also want some outside advice or perspective on what they could do differently or do better, or if for some reason they're, still maybe developing their corporate social responsibility approach. But in my experience, it's usually smaller companies that are thinking more actively about, oh, we also need to do this. And I think, truthfully, a lot of very nascent companies, startups, others are actively thinking about it because so many entrepreneurs today want to build a business that is contributing to the greater good, and is doing good as well as hopefully doing well as a business. And I think that's a perspective that is a little different now than perhaps a few decades ago.
And so, how does CSR layer into a business? I know that there are structural ways that businesses, in the last 10 years have really shifted to build out and really ingratiate themselves. So how does CSR kind of differentiate from like structuring a company?
Yeah, and I would hope that any company isn't thinking of CSR just as a way to ingratiate itself into the hearts and minds of its community or its employees or its customers and things. I only say that sometimes I think people do sometimes get concerned about so-called greenwashing, for example. If I as a company say, we're doing all this great environmental stuff, when in fact we are having a significant toll on environmental resources, right, that can actually be a liability. But as you mentioned earlier, I think the integration of corporate social responsibility is key. If it's viewed as just, it's this cost, it's this thing we've got to do, it almost feels like a marketing exercise alone. Whereas if it really becomes integrated into how a company thinks about its work and its products or its services, whatever it is the company does, it really should be viewed as an investment, in my view, in the long-term health and success and well-being of that company, of its products, of its services, of its employees, of its various stakeholders. And so I think viewing it as an investment in the future long-term health and sustainability of the company is the right approach, as opposed to, there's this thing we got to do because all of our competitors are doing it.
Right.
And I think that long-term investment throughout a company's product, services, offerings, ways of working can be a really important ingredient for success.
So let's assume that some folks that are listening to this are like, yep, got it. We got to figure out CSR or how to incorporate. Talk a little bit about some of the current trends that you're seeing in strategic development and implementing, and just what you're kind of seeing at large within the community currently when it comes to CSR.
Sure, and I'm referencing a document I've sort of been working on a little bit that we may hope to put out there, sort of a white paper on corporate social responsibility. But I think there are a few areas that are especially salient at the moment, and I would include among those sustainable business practices. Mm-hmm. Everyone is talking about sustainability, and I think there's sustainability in terms of environmental and other knock-on effects, but there's also sustainability in terms of how do we as an organization remain a viable and ongoing and successful, sustainable company. Mm-hmm. I think ethical labor practices is another area that you're seeing a lot of companies thinking about, talking about. Just you look at the headlines today, the labor movement is having a moment in the United States that it has not had in decades. Community development and how companies are thinking about the communities of which they're part, how they invest in those, making them livable and successful, not only for their employees, but just as a member of that local community. Reporting and transparency, good governance, I think is another area that a lot of companies are thinking a lot about, whether privately held or publicly traded. That transparency and good governance piece is really, really important to the owners, to the shareholders, to the employees, and to others. I think, of course, the environmental aspect is key, and that's something a lot of companies are thinking about, not just to be good corporate citizens, as it were, but because we are really in some moments of some substantial and important environmental change, and that goes back to that sustainability piece. Companies need to be thinking about how are we ensuring that our practices are putting us in a place to be successful decades from now, and not be in a really dangerous or risky situation.
Well, so along those lines, George, as you're looking out, what are some challenges or concerns that folks should keep an eye out for in the near or even longer term that you would recommend as these programs are built out? What are some of those core challenges?
I think, two sort of come to mind. One is the buy-in, the stakeholder buy-in. I think that can often be a challenge. And again, it depends. I think in some ways we are seeing a bit of a generational shift amongst business leaders a little bit. But for a company to think about its corporate social responsibility work as a long-term investment and as good for the business can take some educating or some understanding, as opposed to just, oh, this seems to be impacting my bottom line, why are we doing this? And so it's that long-term
Talk a
sustainable
little bit
view.
about that shift that you're seeing.
Well,
What's the
just as I
shift
mentioned earlier, I think that I think entrepreneurs who are coming up in the world now often enter or bring to their idea or their venture some of this thinking already. I think prior generations were much more focused on their fiduciary responsibility and increasing shareholder value. But I think entrepreneurs today are thinking much more about the larger social responsibility they have in addition to a fiduciary responsibility. And we see that with the creation of benefit corps and social purpose corporations. Different states have different laws that have allowed for more of this hybrid model where it's not first and foremost about the bottom line. It's actually about the larger impact, the bottom line being a very important ingredient in that, of course.
Yeah.
I think the second that I would mention is the measurement piece. So measuring the impact of your efforts, of your work.
Because that can be really hard. I mean, it's hard to define impact, right?
Yeah, it's extremely challenging. And so I think, and it's one of the things that I'm excited about the Cicero team. The Cicero team actually brings a lot of experience and background in monitoring, evaluation, and learning to build in some of those, in doing a strategy and helping a company think through some of these efforts and its work, thinking through what are those measures, what are those metrics by which we are going to be able to assess some of the impact down the road. Now, it's not perfect, and it's not all. There's art and science, certainly, as there are with so many things in business. But increasingly, there are good tools and approaches and frameworks, even software and things that can help measure some of that impact in a way that's demonstrable and defensible is not the right word, but that helps people really understand, oh, this is what we set out to accomplish. We've been able to move the needle to this degree.
Got it. George, any last thoughts that you'd like to end off?
Only, I guess, one other very important current topic I think that I neglected to mention, I would just say, is the social equity piece. I think this is another piece that a lot of companies are thinking about, need to be thinking about. And that's, it's another opportunity for companies to be thinking about their role in social equity and social justice, and what responsibility or opportunities they may have as an important player in the lives of their communities, their employees, their customers. So I think that's another area that a lot of companies are really thinking a lot about right now.
It's a good note to end on. Thanks, George.
Thank you.